Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to this session. We could have waited a little longer, but we have a lot to cover this afternoon. So the participants will join us as we go, so that we can at least get the welcoming and introduction on the way. I would call on Madam Anne Gituku-Shongwe, who is the UN Women representative for Southern Africa Multi-Country Office, to just give us a word of welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and good afternoon, everyone. So wonderful to have this opportunity to hold hands with you, WIEGO, and with other partners to be able to have this conversation. It's a conversation that is really, really long overdue. It is one that is very, very important at this time. I really wanted to just say that for us at UN Women and in our partners at the UN, we have learned a lot during COVID. COVID has taught us a lot, that we perhaps, there's always a silver lining in every crisis, and it's a crisis that we cannot afford to waste. What we learned was how so much hunger, so much insecurity existed amongst women in particular in the informal sector all over the world. And we started to do quite a bit of focus across the world to try to figure out what is it that we need to be able to do that would make a big difference to women who were so affected by the pandemic. And you know, I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail around our work, but just to say that COVID forced us to start asking some very difficult questions. Should we be, you know, what kind of social protection system should we establish? Should we start shifting to cash transfers much more than we were doing previously? It forced us to start thinking much more, and we had multiple countries from all over the world who began to, in their various stimulus packages, looking at ways to put money directly into women's hands. You know, we've had some and last year at the CSW, there was a huge focus on social protection instruments. And we found that they were not even, they were inadequate during this time. And so what we're looking forward to in this conversation today, to Jackie and the team at WIEGO who've been working on this, is to hearing, you know, and learning what can we do differently? What is it that we must do at the policy level? What is it that we must do practically to be able to shift the game for women in informality? We heard the shocking news of the large number of domestic workers who've lost their jobs. And that's in a country like South Africa where there's some level of protection. But in many of our other African countries, and we've looked across African countries where many domestic workers lost their jobs, and many of them have just no recourse. They have no alternative. And we can say that of domestic workers. We can say that of home-based workers, whether from textiles to farms to, you know, who have no form of real social protection. And so this conversation is such an important conversation that we believe will give us the chance to truly dig deep and ask ourselves, what do we need to do? What are the steps that we need to take? And hold hands with the government, hold hands with all these partners. In 2017, UN Women and UN across the world, led by the Secretary General, had a high-level panel on women's economic empowerment. And in that high-level panel, there were 7 areas, 7 drivers of the economy that were highlighted. And one of them was very much about the world of informality, about the unpaid work of women and valuing that and revaluing that. And as we move now into our Generation Equality campaign, which we are now driving as part of the post-Beijing 25 season, one of them is on economic justice. And South Africa, there's 6 action coalitions The One Action Coalition is on economic justice, and South Africa is one of the leads on that. There is quite an interesting conversation that's taking place right now about what is the blueprint that we want. And I know WIEGO is participating in some of these conversations, but here we want to be able to put that on the table because South Africa is one of the leads. So we can take this conversation and put it into the global space to start saying, what do we want to do with that? What do we want to do with some of the issues around informality, unpaid care work? How do we restructure the economy so that women everywhere have equal access, have the kind of sustainable opportunity that we need and the kind of livelihoods that they need to be able to continue to feed their families and live thriving lives. So I want to welcome you warmly to this meeting today, to this webinar. We've been very looking forward to it. We're excited to listen to the study and really come up with wonderful solutions. So I welcome you from UN Women, but also on behalf of the United Nations, other UN agencies who have been participating in this engagement, and really looking forward to it. So thank you so much, Jacqueline, for the opportunity. Thank you.
Most welcome, and thank you, Anne. And I wanted to check, I was told that potentially the Director General of the Department of Women will be with us. If Advocate, you are here and you can hear me.
She's here.
Oh, yes. You are most welcome to welcome us as well.
Thank you. Is it my turn now to open?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, Advocate.
Okay. Oh, maybe they can. Can you see me? I got lost here.
Advocate, I didn't see you here, so I didn't acknowledge you.
We want to see
acknowledge you.
Okay, I'm trying to. My screen just got lost when this document was shared. I'm trying to find myself here so that I can do the. Here. I'm not sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I got lost. Can you see me?
Now we can see Advocate.
We see you, Advocate. I'm sorry that I did not acknowledge you. I had not seen you here yet, so I didn't acknowledge you, but I really want to acknowledge you as my real partner in crime in this work together. So thank you, DG, and to the others who are here. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to UN Director, Executive Director, Ms. Pumzile Mlambo.
No, it's the difference between social security and social protection. So social security.
Even when she's not here. Good afternoon to Ms. N. Gituku-Shongwe. Good afternoon to all participants, representatives from all government departments, representatives from informal sector, informal business sector, representatives from civil society organizations. You know, I didn't write a speech to open, but I just felt like I want to speak from my heart. You know, when you look at where we come from, I was thinking today, we had Nairobi, forward-looking strategies. We had the Cairo program of action from the conference, what was it, International Conference on Population and Development. We have a Beijing platform for action. We have CEDAW and all the general recommendations. We have AU protocols and all those. There's so many documents that we're busy developing. But all these women are still standing one place. Things are not changing. It's only for the few women who make it and go big, like as in big, very big. But majority of women are still in one place. A majority of women are subjected to violence against women. Majority of women look after the children, A majority of women look after the children. are left alone with the children. They are single parents. Majority of women don't even receive maintenance from the fathers of the children. They have to just suffer alone somewhere in a corner. And yes, we give grants. Grants are meant to help them. But one thing I've realized is that, yes, women receive grants, but women would like to be independent. Women would like to be contributors to the economic growth of the country. Women want to take their children to school, educate their children, and make sure that their children contribute to the development of the country. There's so many things that women want to do. And we make promises as government, but those promises do not, materialize. So when I looked at the report that we are meeting here about, I just felt so bad because yesterday I was attending one DG clusters and there was a presentation that we made as a Department of Women on the impact of COVID on women. And a DG from one department says, yeah, I see you guys expected us to report on women. We didn't implement those indicators. It's like, you can't expect us to do that. You didn't even tell us what to do. I always ask myself, what strategies do we have to put together in order for us to be heard, in order for informal businesses, women who are involved in informal businesses to be heard, women who are subjected to gender-based violence, because you can't talk informal businesses and not talk gender-based violence. It's not just violence at home, but also violence in the streets because women are robbed their monies and all those things. As we discuss here, as I'm opening, I'm just saying, yes, I'm the Director General of the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. The responsibility of this department is to ensure socio-economic empowerment of women, youth and persons with disabilities. And the minister, our minister is the minister in the presidency responsible for women. However, it seems as if even that strategic position doesn't really work. What is it that we need to do? I was appealing also to the UN to say, can you please capacitate me? Because this department has a huge mandate, very, very huge mandate. However, it's structured and resourced to fail. So I was saying to them, we need to ensure that we don't lose these trillions that they're talking about now with the economic recovery and construction. So I think as we deliberate today, as the report is presented and we come up with strategies, one thing that we need to look at is how do we make sure that women, youth and persons with disabilities benefit from this construction trillion that has been set aside, all these economies that have been set aside to revive the economy of South Africa. Because if women don't benefit, it means next time when we have any other pandemic, or if, because people have been talking about the second pandemic, like the pandemic coming back, then women will die because of hunger. So whatever that we discuss or we agree on, let's have this in mind. How do we come up with a strategy that will make sure that somebody listens to us, somebody who's holding the purse, somebody who's controlling the purse listens to us? Thank you very much. I have opened because I was requested to open, but I know I took long. I just poured my heart to all of you. And I hope that all of us will be able to come up with strategies to ensure that no one is left behind. No one is left behind. Each and every person has to benefit from this economic recovery and reconstruction package. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much, Advocate. And we can definitely hear your heart. And we are here with the same heart, actually, I must say. WIEGO, the colleagues in WIEGO and ourselves have the very same heart. And this talk and this webinar is at the very right time where these things are going to be discussed. And I want to say that there we have, I thought we'll be talking about action points at the end of the meeting, but here we have our work cut out already. Advocate has already mandated us to, first of all, capacitate her department in ensuring that women partake in the recovery program. So my intention is not to talk today. There are many experts who will be telling us how to do that exactly. So I will leave some time for them to do that. I wanted to know whether the ambassador, His Excellency, the Ambassador of Japan is already here. As you can see, we are not only the UN and the WIEGO and the government, we also have bilateral allies in this gender equality movement. So just to check whether he is around already, if he is, to give us also his word of support. Otherwise, we'll then proceed to actually opening the actual presentations of the meeting. Yes, I'm told that he's around. The floor is yours, Your Excellency, and thank you so very much for being with us this afternoon.
Hi. Hi, good afternoon, Anne, and also good afternoon, Advocate Mikate Kojo-Malke. And I learned that Dr. Mori Moguchi of the Social Department also with us. So, and of course, the distinguished panelists, thank you very much for your participation for today's very important webinars. And thank you very much for the opportunity you gave to me today to join your webinar. After the start of the national lockdown in March, I have witnessed how the South African economy has suffered, and I have to say, significantly. It is therefore not hard for me to imagine how the informal sectors, in particular the women belonging to these informal sectors, have been worstly hit by the pandemic. When my thought go to the fact that the scale of the informal sector counts for about 30% of total employment in this country, and that considerable share is out of the reach of social protections, I understand that the issue is of an urgent nature. In this context, I understand that today's discussion is based on two important reports entitled. The first one is, as I know, that the gender's effect of the ongoing lockdown and school closure in South Africa. And the second one, the COVID-19 crisis and the South African informal economy. I think that those paper is very, very well done and worthy to read the discussion of today's. The finding in these papers suggest my concern is real and now verified. My gratitude and respect go to the authors who managed to compose the work despite the unique limitation in the availability of relevant data due to the severe lockdown regulations. In one of the reports, the proposed policy recommendation to significantly increase the volume of food parcels has drawn my particular attention. At the end of September, the Japanese Chamber of Commerce and Industries, along with the Nelson Mandela Foundation, delivered, indeed, food parcel to a local community, supposed to be one of the poorest community, Zandspruit. The embassy also provided, I'm talking about this particular community, a solar panel to its community center called the Mtonjeni Community Center just in January, just before the lockdown. And I strongly hope that the power panel have enabled the center to operate at full swing during the lockdown time, including doing their job for the job creation for the women in the informal sectors, without being interrupted by load shedding. To support the informal sector, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, known as JICA, has also been working with the agricultural sectors. They support small-scale farmers through the initiative called Smallholder Horticulture Empowerment and Promotion, known as SHEP, S-H-E-P. And it's not only the government or the agency who are concerned on this, the actual situations. The Japanese companies in South Africa are also serious on the matters. Let me give some example. In April, Japanese automotive maker Isuzu supported the NGO called Food Forward South Africa to urgently transport food parcels from Johannesburg to communities in Port Elizabeth. They use the company's vehicle and providing 750,000 of meals. In the following months, Toyota has donated to the local taxi industry in 9 provinces over 10 million of worth of sanitizers and face masks. Nissan as well provided 12 of its car to assist in the process of screening tests in the local community of the Gauteng province. I sincerely hope the initiative and cooperative by Japan have been benefited the women in the informal sector who bravely deal with daily challenges. In the same context, the Japanese government responded to the UN Women's work to cope with the impact by COVID-19. We make financial contribution for the offices across the African continent, including, of course, South Africa multi-country office. It was in June, and the amount that we contributed is $200,000 of dollars. I hope the contribution will be of help to women in the informal sector, also serving as a tool to prevent gender-based violence and supporting women with HIV and AIDS. I would like to conclude my remark by saying that COVID-19 has reminded us of the harsh realities that many women and girls have to face on a global scale. To make a better society with empower the women in the era of post-COVID-19, Japan is resolved to do its best by being a key player in the fight towards eradicating the challenges faced by women and girls. I wish you all a very successful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And to the rest of the audience, just to mention how His Excellency had such a hectic and busy schedule, but he made time to be with us just to prove that gender equality is really at the core of what the embassy stands for, and he himself as an individual. And thank you very much. We know that in you we have an ally, and we will definitely be calling on you whenever we think that you may be of help. So colleagues, without taking much longer, we have, as you have, maybe let me share the agenda so you see how much we have in store. Can you all see the screen? Okay,
Yes.
so we have with us experts who are going to give us both a macro picture of the problematic that we are gathered here for, as well as the lived stories of the different women in our communities who are being faced and are facing this impact of COVID. And as you can see, it's quite a loaded agenda. I will not go into giving a big introduction of the colleagues, but this will be combined, will be put in a two-pager together with everyone who participated in making this an opportunity come to pass. We will put that together with the recording of the webinar and share it with you. At the same time, we would have really loved to know each and every one of you seated with us today and who's going to ponder on these issues with us. So if you can, please in the chat, put in your name and your affiliation. It will be greatly appreciated. And we'll compile this again and share with you when we send the recording of the webinar. So I will go to start. The first speaker on the panel of experts is Myrtle. Myrtle is the Interim Urban Policies Program Director at WIEGO and an Associate Professor at Rhodes University. He's going to give us an overview of the national picture. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I've just received a note that you'll have to stop sharing your screen before I share my slides.
Okay.
I think that's probably what you're doing now. Great.
Right.
Thank you very much. I think we're okay now. Can you just indicate that you can see my screen?
Yes, we do see your screen. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I thank you for the opportunity to talk today. I know I don't have much time, but what I'd like to do is just start the conversation by giving an overview about what we know in terms of the impacts of the crisis, particularly on women and women in informal employment. The statistics that I'm going to present are largely based on some joint work with Caroline Skinner, where we analyzed a national household survey in South Africa that was specifically designed to measure the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on South African households. So what we've learned in this first part of the year is that between February and April, there were roughly 3 million jobs lost in the labor market in South Africa. So it was quite a significant, perhaps the most significant impact on the post-apartheid South African labor market. Between Q1 and Q2, when the impacts of the crisis was felt, the official statistics indicate that 2.2 million jobs in total were lost in the transition from Q1 to Q2. Perhaps one of the most sort of noteworthy findings from the crisis and these employment statistics is that 2/3 of these 3 million lost jobs were lost by women. So very much in line with the anticipated impacts of the crisis, women definitely seem to have felt the brunt of this, and we can see that in our South African statistics. So 2 million of the 3 million jobs lost between February and April were lost by women. It's a truly horrifying outcome. We're only now getting to see what the impacts have been across different sectors in the South African labor market, but the very sort of recent statistics from the National Statistic Office suggests that about 640,000 jobs were lost in the informal sector, and more than 300,000 jobs were lost in private households. And private households are, of course, where domestic workers are employed in South Africa. So only looking at two types of informal workers in South Africa, just under 1 million jobs were lost. If we counted other types of informal employment, it's very likely that that number would be substantially higher. So the rate of job loss was significantly greater in the informal economy in South Africa than it was in the formal economy. This is not completely unexpected, and I think it's worth reminding ourselves that internationally, we knew that informal workers were going to bear the brunt of this crisis, given its characteristics. And this really fed into a lot of the very dire predictions about increases in global poverty, simply because the vast majority, 61% of employment in the world is informal. And if a crisis is felt by this group of workers more than others, then that has impacts on national economies and poverty rates and labor markets worldwide. We also anticipated ahead of time that impacts within the informal economy, that is among informal workers, would be experienced unevenly. And that was one of the things we sought to do with this particular study, is to see where among the informal workforce the impacts of the crisis were felt the most. The South African government was very concerned about the informal economy. In South Africa, about a third of the workforce is in informal employment. And there was a very real sense that the pandemic and particularly the government responses, such as the lockdown, would put a lot of informal workers out of work. So one of the predictions at the very outset of the crisis, commissioned by government, was that the extreme poverty amongst households with informal workers would more than double, from 10% to 26%, without some sort of emergency income intervention. So this was well anticipated in advance. And in case you're wondering what extreme poverty is, it's simply a level of poverty below which households can't afford to feed themselves. So extreme poverty is very much associated with a humanitarian crisis. So turning now to some of the work that we did, and in an attempt to discover where within the informal economy the impacts were felt the most in South Africa, we found that just amongst workers that were able to keep their jobs, that is, they didn't lose their employment entirely, about 31% weren't able to work at all in the month of April. In other words, they worked 0 hours, didn't earn any income. And the differences between women and men in the informal economy were fairly noteworthy. The risk of not being able to work was considerably higher for women. About a third of women informal workers weren't able to work any hours. And again, this is only the group that didn't lose their jobs completely. And that compares to about 29% of men in informal employment. The bottom part of the graph shows the same statistics. You can see that just over 25% of formal workers who didn't lose their jobs weren't able to work during the month of April, when South Africa had its lockdown, of course. And the gender pattern is evident there as well. So in addition to informal workers bearing the brunt, women certainly carried the cost of the response to this pandemic in the month of April. Another way to look within the informal economy to try and understand where reductions in working hours were most severe was to look at the level of decreases in the hours worked and the change between February, before the pandemic arrived, and in April when the country was in lockdown. So if you look at the left side of the graph there, you can see the reduction in working hours between February and April for the self-employed in the informal economy, informal employees, and casual workers. And what this shows is that amongst the self-employed and casual workers in particular, roughly half of, they were able to work only about half the time that they worked in February. So the hours they were able to work were essentially cut in half during lockdown. And again, this is only the workers who were able to keep their jobs. This doesn't include those who lost their employment altogether. On the right side of the graph is another important finding. Women were lost roughly twice as much time in the workforce as men, and this is in all types of informal workers. So men cut their working hours roughly by 25%, whereas women lost about half of their working hours between February and April. Not surprisingly, this also translated into a greater loss of earnings for women. On the left side of this graph are the average losses in earnings between February and April for women and men in informal employment. The average tends to disguise what was really going on in the economy, and that speaks to the fact that there was quite a bit of variation of the impact. Many women and men in the informal economy lost their earnings completely, reported zero earnings, and some informal workers were able to maintain their earnings. So the average really hides quite a bit. So if you look at the right side of the screen, these are typical earnings for women and men in informal employment. And here you can see a notable difference. Men's earnings typically decreased by about 60%, whereas women's earnings decreased closer to 70% between February and April. So just another indication that not only in terms of hours of work lost, but in terms of earnings as well, women really carried the cost of, women in informal employment really carried the cost of this pandemic. And this is another way to show the gendered impact of the April lockdown. On the left, you can see the earnings distribution of women marked on the red line, and the blue line denotes the earnings distribution of men. So this is a pre-COVID map of the gender disparities in earnings on the left there. And what you can see is on the right is how this gap between women and men's earnings and self-employment widened over the period. So this is just, I think, a very clear visual representation of the widening gender gap in earnings. So there was a gender gap certainly before the crisis, and I think people in this webinar will understand the reasons why, but it clearly widened as a result of the lockdown measures to combat the pandemic. A final sort of question we asked using the data we had available was where in the earnings distribution this was felt. So what we've got here on the x-axis of this graph are earnings deciles. In other words, at the left are the 10% of informal workers who are the poorest, and then moving to the right are the wealthiest. I use wealthiest carefully. Most informal workers are not wealthy at all, but the higher earning informal workers are to the right of the graph here. Earnings are captured in February with the blue line, and April earnings are captured by the orange line. And what this shows is that the drop in earnings really happened on the left side of the graph amongst the lowest earning informal workers. So you can see in the first, second, third, and fourth deciles, that's where the loss of earnings amongst the informally self-employed was really concentrated during April. If we go to the higher earning informal workers towards decile 6 and 7 and beyond, which isn't in the graph, February and April earnings didn't change as much. But the real drop in earnings that I showed in the previous graphs happened amongst informal workers who were already vulnerable, and as the data suggests, many of these are women. So what I've shown so far is what happened during the April lockdown, which was obviously quite an extreme moment. But we're now in October, soon to be in November, and we have some more data on what's happened in the recovery period. Obviously, the pandemic's not over. The lockdown eased but didn't end. But we have some data now suggesting or giving us some ideas of what's happened in June and what we might call the initial recovery period. Using the same data that we've analyzed for this presentation, overall, it suggests that there's been a fairly limited recovery in South Africa as a whole in the period between April and June. This is probably not surprising, but the economy is certainly not back up and running, and employment gains have been fairly muted. What's been important is that women have remained well behind men in reaching their pre-COVID employment levels. So by June, women's recovery had not been as positive as that of men's, which is probably what we expected, but the data seem to confirm this. The gender wage gap in the South African labor market as a whole was about 30% in February, but it was still, it had increased to 50%, just over 50% in June. So this speaks to the graph that I showed earlier, where the gender gap in earnings widened between February and April. And recent data from the labor market as a whole would suggest that it hasn't recovered to its pre-COVID levels. These gender gaps are widest amongst lower earners in South Africa, which suggests that it would also be widest among informal workers, who are concentrated amongst the lower earners in the labor market. A lot of this gender gap is explained not by necessarily reduced earnings per hour or per time worked compared to men, but really due to the reduction in working hours that women have experienced over this period, both from the types of jobs in which women tend to be concentrated and for the competition women are forced to sort of navigate between care and household responsibilities as a result of the pandemic, closed schools, and the need to earn income. So the recovery period has certainly not been necessarily a positive story, particularly for low earners and for women, and for women in the informal economy, one would imagine, which suggests that it's probably time to think seriously on what we mean about recovery and how we might approach the job ahead. Those of us in South Africa are aware that grants, social grants, and the introduction of new grants have been an important part of the story. Two types of grants in particular have prevented over 5 million people in South Africa from falling below the extreme food poverty line. At the end of July, however, just under a third of those receiving the special COVID-19 relief grant were women. And one of the main reasons for this is that those receiving the child support grant, which are predominantly women, are disqualified from receiving the special relief grant. This suggests that there's been a real bias in relief efforts, particularly because the child support grants are meant to support children. Just because they're awarded to the caregiver of children, who are predominantly women, doesn't mean that women are receiving that support themselves. There are certainly some positive developments going forward. The extension of the relief grant by 3 months is welcomed and should be encouraged. But for gender parity, particularly around things such as poverty alleviation and food security, the reduction of hunger, the caregivers grant and the top-ups to the old age pension really should be extended as well. The recovery period is clearly not moving along as well as we would have hoped, which means that we shouldn't lose sight and we should of these initial efforts, and we should accelerate them, particularly for groups that are falling behind. But more broadly, the current amounts are well below what's actually required. A simple calculation about the cost to feed a child a nutritious diet, or the cost to keep a household above the hunger threshold would demonstrate that the grants are very minimal and are just meeting the bare minimum of needs. And without a recovery of the economy and the labor market in particular, I think we're going to continue to be reliant on these types of support. So I'll conclude with this, just some final thoughts about some things that we've learned. I think one of the important things is when you have an economy where so many workers are reliant on daily earnings, and the holes in the social security safety net are so vast, it really creates a situation where a country can be caught out. And the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly been a valuable lesson in that regard. And we can take several things from it. Perhaps one of the more implementable and practical would be to relook at the UIF system so that informal workers, and we can think particularly of domestic workers, can have access to it. An expanded UIF system would have been invaluable in the present crisis. So perhaps this is the moment to make sure that more workers in South Africa have access to this type of support. The Department of Small Business Development has had fairly stringent criteria for support to small businesses, largely excluding informal businesses, and particularly those owned by non-South Africans. I think this is an important moment to rethink about what we mean in terms of inclusivity in the small business sector. But longer term, it's a clear opportunity to rethink the role of the informal economy, which in all countries, and South Africa included, is linked closely with the formal economy. It's not possible to separate these two. Many people predicted that the informal economy would respond, would be more robust in the face of the pandemic, but clearly all the data we have to date suggests that the informal economy is even more susceptible to large crises such as the current one. On that note, I think I'll end and hand over to the other speakers. And just to conclude by saying thank you very much again for allowing me the opportunity to present some of the work we've done.
Thank you very much, Mike. And indeed, we don't have much time, but I guess this first foundational presentation was really needed so that we can see that as we advocate for policy, certain policy direction is really based on tangible data and on realistic data. And I'm told, first of all, I would like to welcome all our friends and colleagues globally. I was going through the list of participants, and I see we have people from almost all the continents, and you are all welcome, and thank you so much. And I would like to make a special note of welcome to the International Coordinator of WIEGO, Ms. Sally Rover. You are most welcome in our midst, and thank you so much for being here. And we just heard from Mike on the national overview of what COVID has actually shown us. And as Anne said, I think COVID could be an opportunity for us to really see what is not working in our development environment and fix it. So without any delays, let me pass the mic to my co-facilitator, Jen Barrett, who's going to take us to a session on discussing with the representatives, workers' representatives in our midst to give us the experiential feel of what women went through during this crisis. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thanks, Jacqueline, and thanks to the audience at large. I won't waste any time, but just to introduce you to two very special guests we have today. We have with us Rosheda Muller, who is the president of the South African Informal Traders Alliance, which organization is a national organization of street vendors. It's also an affiliate of the StreetNet International, a global organization of street and market vendors. Our other special guest is Myrtle Witbooi, who I'm sure is known to all of you. She's the General Secretary of the South African Domestic Service and Allied Workers Union, SADSAWU, and she's also the International President of the International Federation of Domestic Workers. Both Myrtle and Rosheda are steeped in the tradition of the slogan that has been adopted by informal workers all over the world, nothing for us without us. And I'm sure what they have to say today will ring true to their long-standing practice of voicing the desires, the needs, the demands of both domestic workers and informal workers, informal traders all over the world. So just to begin, I want to pose a question to both of them, and that is simply, starting with Rosheda. Rosheda, could you describe to us, as a representative of one of the hardest hit groups of workers in South Africa, could you paint a picture of what the situation of the pandemic has meant for you and your members? Over to you, Rosheda.
Hi, good afternoon. All protocols observed. It's a great honor for me to be on this wonderful platform today to talk about our sector. I'm the president of SAITA, the South African Informal Traders Alliance, which has presence in all 9 provinces of South Africa. If I should start with one word to describe what COVID-19 did to us, it is unprecedented. This phenomena was so unprecedented, it led to shock the sector. This unknown, something that we never experienced before, hit us so hard and so fast that many women suffered severely by this. COVID-19 came upon us at the end of March. And we had to realize, what next? We had to quickly adapt to this new phenomena. We had to observe COVID protocols, something that in my 67 years I have not done. I am or have been and still is in the informal sector for the past 32 years. Now, informal traders, as you know, we are not there out of desire. We are there out of a need to survive and to earn a living. So informal traders earn a living day by day. Today I make 100 Rand, tomorrow I make 300 Rand. I have to support my family, I have to buy new stock. So it's a day-to-day business. And savings is something that's really not, many of us don't even have bank accounts. I must say at this point, when we're in such big struggle with this COVID, that the WIEGO guidelines became such an important tool that we could distribute throughout the country via WhatsApp. And that's what we do. That's how we communicate. We can communicate via WhatsApp to each and every trader across the country. The organizations have groups on WhatsApp, and in that way we could feed through the information. At this time, we, as the organization, we immediately appealed to government for intervention and to provide relief. But it seemed that government went into hiding. Municipalities went into hiding. Most of the informal traders did not receive the masks and the sanitizers. We had to do it ourselves. We had to find it. We had to manufacture our own masks, which was, in a way, many of the informal traders are little clothing manufacturers, and that actually gave a bit of business to them. But we struggled to get government to come on board with us. And women were losing their jobs. And this led to also gender violence in the home, because there's no money coming in, there's no work. And alcoholism played a big role in some of the communities, and women became more and more depressed through this period. We need to realize that the informal economy workers, and I think the statistics has been made, 3 million across the country. And the suffering that we have seen during the last few months is still there. On a day-to-day basis, we engage with some of our members across the country. Some of them have not returned. Some markets are still closed. But, informal traders, they're entrepreneurs. And what did come out, which is a good thing out of this, is the fact that they started doing business via WhatsApp. So they couldn't trade on markets and that, but they went that route. It assisted in alleviating a little bit. We did ask the corporates to come on board. Very few. In SAITA's case, only one corporate came on board to provide us with food parcels. And what is so sad is that the informal trader trades on municipal land. And the municipality, local government is your first stepping stone. It's almost like saying, it's my landlord. But my landlord was not to be found when I needed him most. We can also say, harassment, confiscation of stocks was still an order of the day. Law enforcement didn't care whether they were taking the food out of a person's mouth, whether that woman would not be able to feed her family the next day or the night, but they would say, you cannot trade because it's COVID. So it was a very, very big struggle for us. And we're still suffering from all that has happened. But as SAITA, and with our partners in WIEGO and StreetNet, we are pushing government to ensure that we be acknowledged, recognized, and that we have decent conditions and enabling environment. And we need global support in this. I want to thank the United Nations Women, to the UN Women, to host us today, so that the voices of those on the streets, on the corners, in the backyards are heard, because they are self-employed. They provide for themselves, no matter how little. But when that was taken away, we became numbers on the unemployed list. For now, I'd stop there.
Thank you, Rosheda, for that very impassioned description of the impact on street traders of the pandemic. Can we move to you, Myrtle? If you could give us an overview of the impact of the pandemic on domestic workers.
Thank you for this opportunity to be here with you today. I think you know that with the lockdown, domestic workers was caught in between, like we used to say in the old days, a crossfire. They were caught between their...
Sorry to interrupt you. Could you put your camera on?
Video on, my video, okay. Oh, wow, there's, okay, sorry.
I'm sure people would love to see you. Good, okay. Thank you.
Okay, I think that domestic workers was caught in between a crossfire between their homes, their workplaces, and their families. When the lockdown started, thousands of domestic workers were sent home to the rural areas to go home and rather stay home and wait for the employer to call them back. What has that done to the domestic workers going home? They went home without any income. They went home without knowing what will happen to their families. Currently, the situation is that many of those domestic workers have slowly been coming back into town, but certain restrictions was put on them when they returned to their workplaces. Also, about many domestic workers have found themselves in a situation where they realized that they were not actually registered for unemployment fund. What happened then? Domestic workers has no access to the unemployment fund. When applying for unemployment fund, the minister made the announcement that now domestic workers must use cell phones. Domestic workers must get used to technology, must use smartphones. How can domestic workers access now to get unemployment fund? Those employers that have applied for domestic workers for the unemployment benefit has actually only got 1 month or 2 months. Also, the minister made an announcement to say domestic workers and all workers will not get less than 3,500 rand. About 500 domestic workers approached SADSAWU to say they basically only got 1,700 rand. They basically only got 1,800 rand. And that was all they got, and they only got it for 2 months. The second crisis that's hitting domestic workers also now with the COVID-19. The Minister of Labour made another statement to say, domestic workers, 1 month of your COVID-19, and if you were paid, that can be used for your holiday. Many domestic workers go home the end of the year. Many domestic workers is saving to go home the end of the year to their families. What are they going with home now? What are they taking to their families? How will they provide for their children for school fees, for school fees for the next year? So currently the situation is very bad in the domestic sector. The 350 Rand excess solidarity fund. What domestic worker has received the 350 benefit? We have daily 75 to 70 WhatsApp calls to our offices to say, how do I access the fund? How can I find money for this? Then, of course, we also find a new thing happening. Employers is now restricting domestic workers, coming back to saying, you need to stay in your room, in your backyard. If you want something to be done, I will do it for you. I will go out and I will see to things. Other employers is letting us go back to the apartheid years to say to domestic workers, you must wash your washing outside, you must do everything outside. The other thing that's also hit us, domestic workers have children. Domestic workers must see to their children. A new thing that starts with this, the education is that domestic workers, children will now get their homework on the mother's cell phone or things. How will the mother have access to data? How will the mother be able to give her phone to a child now to do the homework? So currently we are sitting in a very bad situation. We don't seem to see any light at the end of the tunnel. We just heard the Minister of Labour saying another 3 months will now be added to the COVID-19 funding. How are we going to ensure that domestic workers are going to benefit from this? So we are saying that the Minister of Labour again made a statement, 250,000 domestic workers has lost their jobs, but only 19,000 has access to the unemployment fund. The question is, how does the other workers survive? How do they survive? Where do they get money? So at this precise moment, because I know we don't have much time, the crisis is there for domestic workers. The crisis is there is, how does the domestic worker survive? And of course, every day we have retrenchment. Just now I answered another retrenchment. The employer said, well, all I can give her is 10,000 Rand for the 30 years she's been working for me or for the 5 years. So how are we going to ensure that domestic workers will benefit as we go forward? How are we going to be sure that domestic workers will be part of this new world? And how are we going to do it? So SADSAWU Daily is facing that question. SADSAWU Daily have to answer the WhatsApp of domestic workers. We don't have the answers, but we can only add. We need to empower our workers. We need them to understand this is the new world we're working in. So this is currently the situation. There's not much I can because I was out any money. And this is our situation at the moment. Jane, I don't know, and all of you, how we will get out of it, but this is what SADSAWU is facing every day of our life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Myrtle, for an equally impassioned description of the impact on domestic workers of the pandemic in South Africa. Going back to you, Rosheda, having described the conditions of street vendors in this period, could you give us, just in a couple of minutes, your 3 priority policy proposals for getting out of the situation, both in the immediate term and the longer term? Over to you, Rosheda. Once again, thank you, Jane. What is very important is for government to realize that to solve the problems of, us living on the poverty line, instead of growing an economic, a decent livelihood for ourselves, it is important, number one, that the government realize, like we said, nothing for us without us. We need to be in the same room when they decide to do policies. Just an example very quickly. The Department of Small Business Development has now come into the entire country, into all the districts, and they are imposing a district development program. This program does not meet the needs of the informal sector.
This, you know, it's talking about SARS and Sub-C and tax clearance and, you know, it is just not for us. We're earning far below the 8,000 mark that you must pay tax upon. They're not understanding R204. The recommendation 204 is critical to be implemented across the country. And it's with us as SAITA, WIEGO, StreetNet, that we give the government the education of the implementation that will uplift and bring the informal sector to a better status. I thank you.
Thank you, Rosheda. I see on the chat, Jacqueline has described you and Myrtle as frontliners. So over to our second frontliner, back again to Myrtle. If you could make some concrete proposals on policy interventions, and hopefully there are people in the webinar listening today who will hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think that I want to agree with the one proposal that was in WIEGO's. We need to review the policy of the unemployment fund. We need to make it more accessible to domestic workers, and that they also, but currently the unemployment fund is in the hands of the employers. They understand it, they know what it is. So SADSAWU should be more involved, domestic workers, in how we draw a new policy on how the unemployment fund will work for domestic workers. Secondly, we also, as we go forward, we see there's many things coming up now about a basic income grant, a higher basic income grant, childcare support. I think also we, as the vulnerable workers, should get involved in all these policies that is set up there for domestic workers or other workers, and we should have a bigger input in that. Also, thirdly, as you know, the fight that's on now about the compensation and the COIDA, we are very concerned about that because once more, domestic workers are left out of the compensation fund. So if this COIDA, this COVID-19 is now going to hit domestic workers, where are they going to get compensation? So I think a change would be that domestic workers have to speak up for themselves, and that domestic workers, together with the unions, start drawing our own policy on how do we see the way forward and what we want, and how even the national minimum wage, as you know, domestic workers are also excluded, they get a lower wage. So there's many ways we have to renew, and we have to draw up new policies of how we're really going to empower and how we're really going to bring those women up to speak for themselves and add their voice to everything. This is the way that I see forward. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you very much, Myrtle. And perhaps just one comment before I hand back to Jacqueline for the next speaker. In case anyone is a little bit confused about the unemployment insurance situation with domestic workers have legal access, but the problem is that the employers do not implement. They don't make the contributions. And as Myrtle so clearly said, the problem is that it's in the employer's hands and the employer's power to register and then incorporate domestic workers into the unemployment insurance system. So the problem is that the domestic workers themselves can't register themselves unless the employer does, and the employer blocks this by being non-compliant. So back to you, Jacqueline, and to our next speaker. Thank you again, Rosheda and Myrtle, so very much for your very strong contributions.
Thank you so much, Jen. Wow, wow, wow. Didn't you feel like we could have just gone on and on and on? I so much love the work that our frontliners are doing, and I think it fits very, very well in with the intention actually of the association that UN Women has with WIEGO in ensuring that policy actually does speak to lived experiences on the ground. Because of the time consciousness, I did not even position this webinar in its context. This webinar is happening in the context of ensuring women in the informal economy are properly covered in terms of social security. And that's an initiative that has been undertaken within the UN SDG Fund, which is working on ensuring social protection for all and ensuring leaving no one behind. So as you can see, there is really, our work is very well cut out for us. And I agree with you, both our frontliners. Indeed, the policies, the very good policies, should speak and respond to the needs on the ground. There was a model we used to use long time ago in my former life, looking at a issue of access to health and saying that the fact that the health services available does not mean that people will access it. There is an issue of accessibility, an issue of acceptability, and an issue of quality. So these are the kind of things we need to look at when we have good progressive policy, but which unfortunately is not being accessed by everyone. So without taking too long, I will introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Thuli Moyo. Thuli Moyo is a legal researcher at Asiye eTafuleni, a Durban-based NGO, and she's going to take us through findings from an in-depth study that they did in Durban. And Thuli, please, if I can beg with you, time is not on our side, to just limit your presentation to really around 5 to 6 minutes. And to our participants, because we are really running behind time, this is one of those activities, if context allowed, we would have a full day deliberation on, and to try and put it in 1 hour and a half is really almost impossible. So for your questions, kindly start jotting your questions in the chat box, and if we manage, we get to them. If not, then we'll look at answering them and sending the question and answers together with the recordings as well. So over to you, Thuli.
Hi everyone. So my mandate is a clear one, just to try and paraphrase the findings of a survey that we did in Durban relating to the impact of COVID-19 and how it affected informal workers on the ground and them actually being able to access and earn livelihoods as they normally do on a daily basis. Can you please kindly affirm if you're seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
All right. So overall, I mean, the overall findings of it all is looking at the issue of how informality has been affected by the pandemic on a daily basis. The most outstanding impact of it all has been the economic aspect and how informal workers have been deprived of the ability of earning livelihoods. So this survey was conducted in a period where it was clearly after lockdown, just a month after lockdown. It was a WIEGO initiated research that was conducted in 12 cities, but particularly, as I said, this presentation will be confined to Durban. It was conducted initiating in April, where we conducted it among 180 informal workers that constituted essentially street vendors, market traders, and informal recyclers, of which 103 of those people were women, of which were the majority of the interviewees that we conducted the study with. Okay, next. All right, so one of the most important aspects of it all was the impact on incomes. As I've said, one of the most important findings was how the pandemic actually impacted on informal workers financially. So what you realize is in July 2020, May, we have had 72% of workers reporting a drop in household income compared to pre-lockdown levels. The same is applicable for market traders, who are recording a percentage of about 65% with regards to the losses of the income that they might have accrued in that period. The same applies, of course, for street vendors and waste pickers, with which a lot of them, particularly for waste pickers, now what we see is an issue of them being mostly dependent on accessing material from the formal sector, which was also closed because of COVID-19. So we see access to the markets itself being impaired by the closure of the formal sector not being operating at that particular time, and of course, with regards to the policies that were being imposed by the municipality in that regard. Next slide. Right, so what we see again when you're looking at the issue of the gendered impact of the whole issue of the pandemic and how it affected the informal sector. So we see women's incomes suffering, like having more of suffering more to a greater extent than men. So when we experience a 47% drop in income in the females versus a 22% drop in income for the males. And then when it comes to street vendors, we have a little gender difference in income drop as compared to waste pickers. And then when you look at market vendors, we have got male incomes also having suffered to a greater extent than the women's. We see an 89% drop in income in males versus a 60% drop in income for females. So in terms of trying to explain a little bit on how maybe that could, the financial aspect of it, or how it's linked to the all other social impact of informal workers, mostly women, and how it's impacted in a change in the care and household responsibilities that are being held by women. So what we see is, I mean, natively, mostly women are the ones that take up the role of household and childcare responsibilities than men. So what we see is for informal vendors, informal street traders, we see about 44% increment in terms of the responsibilities and how that really affected them in being able to juggle between doing their work at home and also being able to go to work at the same time. And then when we look also at informal recyclers, we see also a 59% affecting them in regards to the increment also in the household and childcare responsibilities. So again, there's a quotation here from one of the informal workers that states that there is also that now predicament of them having to choose between staying at home and coming to work either with their kids, that also including an additional financial obligation because there is a transport fare to ferry the kid to work, but also increasing the risk for the child, I mean, the exposure to the COVID-19 and all that, because we realized that most informal food traders and informal recyclers were pronounced as essential workers during that lockdown period. So they were a little bit on a higher risk in terms of exposure to the virus itself. Right, and then also there's an important aspect of how now that we have talked that economically most informal workers were really affected to a greater extent, how then were they able to actually subsidize in terms of the income that they were already had, or in terms of being able to be financially assisted. So we see a lot of them having to rely mostly on social grants in order to actually revive their businesses essentially and survive at home just to put food on the table. But now in terms of the COVID-19 350 grant that was distributed by the government beginning of the period of the lockdown and all that, we realized that because of the application criteria or the threshold that was put there with, it essentially excluded women from being beneficiaries, because one of the requirements was that people that already were applicants or people that were already recipients of existing social grants could not be eligible for the 350 grant. So what we see again, the next graph that is now here is to look at the issue of why street vendors or waste pickers and market vendor traders state, or the reasons that they give as a result of why they were not being able to actually get the 350 grant is applicable. So for waste recyclers, mostly of them are people that essentially live on the streets for most of the time. So for them, it was the lack of documentation and them being unable to have the ideas, and them as such resulting in them not being able to process the applicable grants as required. And then when you look at the market vendors, for them, they say most of them, yes, they did apply, but they did not receive the relief grant as applicable. And then when you look at the street vendors, most of them did say that it was the registration process itself was difficult and time consuming. Hence, most of them weren't able to access the government grants as applicable. Next slide. Okay, so here is just highlighting the percentages of the people that were able to apply for the grants and how most of them were unable to do that. So I mean, it just reiterates one of the factors that the previous speakers just related to, the issue of the registration process being difficult, the issue of people actually being required to produce documentation that they couldn't be able to substantiate at that particular period, and some of them not being able to have bank accounts in that regard. Okay. Right, so the biggest challenge for most traders is economic related. The majority of them rely on the grant money to restock the goods, and despite the fact that the business is also quite low, so that has been the primary challenge for most informal workers. Right, the cash grants. So now, as I said, now when you look at, I think about 90% of the informal workers that we interviewed, one of the main primary challenges was with regards to them, how they were going to actually be financially sustainable or be able to revive their businesses and go back on the streets and commence business as usual. So now most of them rely on the social grants, which will be child grants, will be the old pension grants, and the 350 grants for them to actually restock and go back on the streets. So these are the certain recommendations that we might actually have for DSDD to try and actually alleviate or have as a sort of a mitigating mechanism to assist informal workers. The extension of the C19 grant, which will be accompanied by an extension of the child grant, also top up, of which most of the women informal workers relatively actually rely on that for actually a survival at home and also sustaining their businesses. And the grants also must be extended for a longer period. Workers, apparently, in terms of the survey that we made, they do not see themselves recovering for the next 2 to 3 years to come. Right, and then the DSDB small business grants have registration and other criteria that disqualify most informal workers. Again, it's a reiteration of what the previous speaker talked about, the requirements of the CIPC registration, the requirement of a bank account, and all these are the unrealistic requirements that really come forth in terms of these application processes that are being given to aid the informal workers in terms of the relief grants for COVID-19. Right, and then there are also other additional agent interventions that can be done maybe at local level, particularly maybe for the local municipalities. There's the issue of access to water. Access is key, and that is indisputable in terms of trying to prevent or cap the spread of the virus. So 80% of the interviewees reported difficulties in accessing water both at home and at work. So there is an urgent need for water tanks in order to actually address that situation at hand. And of course, there's the issue of access to sanitation. Many public toilets in Durban inner city are currently locked and must be opened if ever there is a way in which we try and actually alleviate the situation that informal workers are currently facing at hand on the ground. And then there is the issue of continued harassment and confiscation of traders' goods, right? So we really appeal to local municipalities to actually cease doing such, as there has been a high report from the traders in the West Pickers, right? And then there's the issue also of suspension, the interim suspension of local government fees, while traders try to re-establish themselves in this essence. As I said, most of them restocked using social grant money. So it maybe there might be a consideration of that. And then, of course, I mean, COVID-19 comes into aspect with the issue of social distancing and physical distancing of there's a period of about 1 meter apart and all that. So if maybe we can take into account the issues of spatial planning and urban planning policies that take into account the realities that have been introduced by COVID-19 in our current environment. Right, so that's it for now. Thank you so much. I think I did manage to stick to my 5 minutes.
Thank you so very much, Thuli, and what such a confirmation of the national picture that we saw and the stories we heard from Rosheda and Myrtle. And to me, this is just showing that we really have solid data we can use to start interrogating and orienting policy. And we have one last speaker, and our very own UN Women Head of Women Micro-Entrepreneurs, Susan Kimathi. She's going to speak to us on women in informal agriculture as a complement. As you could see, most of the other speakers spoke from the informal workers who are mostly in cities city-based environments, and Susan is going to talk to us more about the rural area and the rural context. And unfortunately, it does not present a different picture. It's all the same. So over to you, Susan, another 5 minutes, and the participants will just bear with us. We'll go a little over so that we can close properly. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie, and thank you to the listeners. I'm going to switch a little bit to the women who are in the urban and the peri-urban areas. I think we've heard quite a lot about those in the urban areas. We, as UN Women, are implementing a program in one of the rural areas in Limpopo province. So when COVID set in, we thought about how we can understand the experiences of these women that we have been supporting under this program by collecting certain data that can help us to understand their experiences and therefore to know how best to support them, or even to understand what are the implications for policy or practice going forward. So the data was collected from women that are in our program, 330 women in Limpopo and in Limpopo province, some rural and peri-urban areas. I will just highlight the key things that were critical in this data that we collected. One of them is, as you can see from the slide, a lot of them, 77% of them were not registered as businesses. And this means that they were not able to access a lot of the packages that government was providing for the entrepreneurs. 77%, and even the 23 that were registered, really, they were not fully registered because they may be registered with one authority, but may not be registered with other authorities that are relevant. So they are not really considered compliant because they lack some of the registration. That has implications considering that government was seeking to support those who were compliant in terms of registration. Then if we look at how they applied for the support packages, you will note from the slide that only a few of them, remember we earned responses from 330 entrepreneurs, only 55 actually, 2 of them in this slide and applied to 2 organizations, were able to apply for the support packages from government. And there were a number of barriers, and especially with regard to the information coming too quickly, and it's coming in a manner that accessing this information is one thing, but also understanding and unpacking it is another thing. So that became a barrier in a way. And then if you remember, the applications were supposed to be done online. These are women who, most of them do not have access to technology. And they may not have even the literacy to navigate through the systems to apply for these support packages online. So some of them responded that they found this quite intimidating, things that we may take for granted, like attaching a document, they found them intimidating. As a result, not many of them were able to access. I should state though that this data was collected from March to end of April and a bit of it beginning of May. So the situation changed as the women got support from either organizations or from government to be able to apply. But even the data that we are collecting now shows that there are so many of them that were not able to apply because they were not registered or they couldn't meet the compliance requirement. Now I'll switch a bit to specific experiences of the agriculture because these were quite illuminating. Some of the women, the respondents here, are farmers, small-scale farmers, farming a range of products, and especially most of them are farming perishable products, which are vegetables and fruits. So their experience was quite, in some instances, heartbreaking, because when the lockdown was effected, you can imagine you have tomatoes that are in the field, that are ready to harvest, and there is a lockdown. So it puts you in a situation where you are likely to lose a lot of these products because you are not able to really harvest them. As much as they fell in the essential services and therefore they were able to continue working in these essential services, there were still some challenges even within those essential services because they require to work with other people. This is a lot of work that requires a lot of labor. But the people who work for them, some of them didn't have permits. So even if the farmer is given a permit, the workers do not have a permit, it means they are not able to come and do the work. Other workers, like everyone else, were fearing the COVID infection and therefore opted to keep away with all the confusion that came with COVID as something that has not been experienced before. And this is happening against a backlog where a lot of them, or actually a large percentage of them, do not really have insurance. So when you lose all these products, there is no way of getting the compensation for the loss. It is a loss that you just have to write off as a farmer. And you know what it means in terms of losing that money. Then other challenges were to do with really getting a market. Some of the farmers have contracts with where they supply their product. So those who had contracts, they were able to still sell because the people they sell to or the companies they sell to, they came to the farms to get the products. But those who didn't have contracts, as we know, some of them will be selling to others who go to sell in the market, or small scale traders who do not have the mobility in terms of the transport and may also have similar challenges with the farmers, the small scale farmers themselves. So what the impact of this was that those who had contracts at least were able to sell something, not everything, because the ones who are buying from them also were reducing the quantities that they were buying from the farmers because the working customers are less, considering the market that is purchasing from these farmers. So what really happened was a lot of loss on the perishable products, and some of them stating that they ended up giving away their products so that they do not rot. And actually some of them just rot because they were not able to find a market for the products. Other challenges were to do with the inputs, getting the inputs to continue their work, even though they were essential services. What was encouraging was that those who are doing poultry farming, the production of eggs, there was a very high demand for eggs, and they couldn't, sometimes they couldn't even meet the demand. It was really, really high. So those ones, they had other challenges, but not necessarily the market challenges because they were able to sell their eggs. However, the ones who were rearing the chicken for meat were in a different situation because they don't have access to large markets. Sometimes they are relying on other families to buy from them or from the small retailers within their own locations. Their market is so small, it's within the community to buy from them. Like in the case of Limpopo, as we know, there is very high festivities during the Easter because that is when the religious season where a lot of people travel to Limpopo. So what some of the women were telling us is that they had reared this chicken in anticipation of that peak period. But then the time came and they do not have the feed for the chicken, and there is no longer a market for this chicken. So they really experienced high losses because they ended up either giving the chicken away, consuming the chicken themselves, or selling them on credit, even though they knew that the people they were selling to on credit may actually not be able to pay because they were in similar financial circumstances as themselves. Now, when we switch to how they experience life in the lockdown, as we know, the women will shoulder a lot of the responsibilities in the household. So you have a woman micro-entrepreneur who is struggling and is battling with a lost opportunity from their businesses, from the closure of businesses and other things that are going on around them. But on top of that, they still have to shoulder the household responsibilities. So at the household level, there were worries around not being able to access food or to provide food for the family because now the income is cut short, or the family size has increased because all the children are at home. Remember, some of the children are fed in school, but now there is the school is not open and they are all relying on the family to feed them. So it was a larger size of a household, and it needed the food, which at a time when money was very limited or not there at all. So those were the things that were disturbing the women. Other things included not being able to pay some of their regular commitments, like the stock bill or the loans that they owed to the people they had borrowed from, not being able to pay for their policies, especially the barrier policies, which they seemed to take very seriously, or they highly esteem the need to keep those barrier policies. But now the money is drying up and they are not able to pay for that. And that was a worry among the women. Then as an entrepreneur, they were worried about the closure of their businesses, the loss of perishable stock. These things happen only in the agriculture. There were also like women who are running hair salons, worried about their product expiring and they may have to throw them away. They were also worried about not being able to pay rent for the premises for those who are renting premises. And an interesting thing is how they felt concerned about the people they employ, for those who employ other people, because we may look at these entrepreneurs as small, but there are those who are smaller than them and are totally reliant on them for their own income. So the wages they pay these workers means a lot to the workers. And the workers were still looking up to them to get some income, but the entrepreneur is not in a position to meet their obligation or even to keep these workers around. So this is something that was also stressing them, and they felt pity for them, for their workers, sometimes unable to help. They have their own problems, but they are also grappling with the issues of the workers they are not able to pay. So maybe some thoughts on the policy and practice. I think the section was really short, so there is a lot more information than what I was able to share. So what I'm putting up for policy or practice consideration, it's based not only on the few slides that I've presented, but on a lot of data that we are sitting with and what we have observed in the communities. There is need really to link current formalization efforts with comprehensive tailored support for micro-entrepreneurs if we really want to build their resilience. We realize right now, for very good reasons, government is keen to formalize these micro-entrepreneurs, but that effort to formalize is not necessarily commensurate to the level of support given the need in the communities. So there is really a very strong case for government to consider linking the formalization effort with comprehensive support that can help these entrepreneurs to meet the compliance needs, to be able to register their businesses, and to be able to not only register and comply, but also retain that status going forward. Because sometimes you can think about registering them now, but for them to keep that compliance going, there is a lot they have to do in terms of submitting maybe like the tax document every year, which they may not have capacity. So I feel there is a need to think not only to help them to register, but also to sustain that registration after they have registered. Government can also create incentive to develop insurance packages with products that have distribution strategies that are suited to entrepreneurs, micro-entrepreneurs. Very high risk, yet no insurance in most cases. the most of them may have the barrier policies or maybe life insurance, a few of them. But really, if we are going to look at the entrepreneurs and the businesses they are running as separate entities, the way we do in the formal sector, then there is need to also insure these businesses so that the entrepreneur doesn't always carry the loss when it happens. So really, the packages that are there may not be well packaged, or even the distribution strategy may not be suitable for them. So it is necessary really to think about some incentive that can help in developing packages that are appropriate for this level of businesses. Also, increasing the market access. There are different ways. Currently, there is some effort, at least at the policy level, from government to procure locally and from entrepreneurs, but I think it's not necessarily directed at the informal sector, at that sector of micro-entrepreneurs. So once they are assisted to register, I think there would need to be some level of effort if they have to access these opportunities, because even when they are registered, they may lack other resources that will enable them to access information and to apply and to tender the way a formal business would tender for the opportunities. So if they have to benefit from these opportunities, there needs to be some deliberate effort to make sure that they are reached in a certain way, in a way that is customized for the level that they are operating at.
So
also,
1 minute.
Yeah, I was saying the last one is really about how we communicate to them. We need to consider their circumstances so that information is packaged in a way that they can assimilate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sue. I am so sorry I have to be rushing everyone, and yet we have such interesting topics. I spoke to Caroline earlier and say that maybe this should just be like an ongoing exercise that we could consider, probably have one call or one meeting every term. And to wrap up, we will put together the policy directions and policy recommendations we see coming out of here, and we'll add it to the webinar recordings that we'll be sharing with you. I also did get many requests from some of you asking to be connected to one or the other participants. I don't know if that is fine with you, if we can fill out a registration table as we received your emails, and then share with you. Those who will feel comfortable, kindly fill in all your details. Others, if you don't feel comfortable, don't do it, but just so we can connect you. Because this webinar will also serve to just connect us for the interest of advancing policy. And now to close for us, I would want to call on Dr. Maureen, who is the Director of Children and Family Social Security in DSD, to just give us a few pointers on where to from here. And after that, we'll be done. And thank you so much for this wonderful and lovely audience. Over to you, Dr. Maureen.
Thank you. Program Director, representatives from UN Women, representatives of academic and research institutions, senior government officials, the conference organizer, ladies and gentlemen. It has been an honor to be among some of the accomplished individuals, as well as to present our perspective, as well as to end today's proceedings. In my language, we say, "Mojamorago ke kgosi," which is loosely translated as the one to have the last meal is a king, in my case, a queen. We are grateful as a Department of Social Development for bestowing on us such a great honor to close
this webinar. I would like to start by acknowledging the concerns that have been raised in the various papers and the presentations that have preceded my speech. I would also like to start by stating that in 2016, the UN began implementing an ambitious new development agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. Today, the world, including South Africa, continues to face prevalent and persistent poverty. The emergence of COVID-19 has worsened our situation. Our government responded quickly by increasing existing social grants, by making the UIF more accessible, by introducing the new COVID SRD grant, and also by dispensing a number of food parcels, working together with a number of NGOs. We know that social protection features prominently amongst the set of the SDGs. Goal 1.3 states that we need to implement nationally appropriate social protection systems for all, including floors, and by 2030 achieve substantial coverage of the poor and vulnerable. Social protection feature in goals to achieve gender equality and to reduce income poverty and inequality both between and within our countries, including South Africa. There is considerable scientific evidence that well-designed social protection programs, when they are well implemented, can be the foundation for sustained social and economic development. Studies confirm that social grants, among others, especially in South Africa, have a strong gender bias. We target the poor, and the large numbers of our people are reached. It prevents and reduces poverty, it promotes social inclusion, and it improves the dignity of vulnerable populations. We all know that social grants contributes to economic growth, promotes human development, and so on. It protects people against the losses due to shocks, whether they be pandemics, and in this case, COVID-19, natural disasters, or economic downturns that we are currently going through. It builds political stability and ensures greater social cohesion. It's a cushion that the poor needs at the time of crisis. We know, lastly, that social protection is a basic human right. In South Africa, the Constitution provides that everyone has the right to have access to social security, including appropriate social assistance for those who are unable to support themselves and their dependents. As a department, we strongly reject any notion that suggests that poverty is the fault of women that are poor. Poverty is the fault of children. Accordingly, we have spared no effort in addressing poverty, including that attacks women and children. Social protection is viewed as a vehicle by means which we can stem the tide of intergenerational transmission of poverty, a true means by which women and children can overcome family cycle of poverty. It is from this departure point that our government strives to provide social assistance to those
who are in need. Since 1994, we all know that we have progressively extended social grants to vulnerable groups to over 18 million beneficiaries up to today. We also offer short-term relief in the form of social relief of distress. However, despite these many positive impacts that the program has delivered over the years to poor South Africans, there's still a significant number of critics who argue that our programs are not sustainable, and at worst, that the program creates a culture of dependency amongst recipients, whom the majority are females. I ask myself, what would have happened during the COVID-19 era if we did not have a cushion such as social assistance? Ladies and gentlemen, any fiscal system has to strike a balance between fiscal and political sustainability. South Africa's system can thus not only be judged on its fiscal outcomes, but also on its constitutional obligation to further the progressive realization of socio-economic rights, especially in the case of women, vulnerable women, the elderly, and in the case of our children. This system has to deliver on both these outcomes, giving tangible expression to the transformation vision of our Constitution.
Dr.
Yes?
Maureen, can I be so rude? Apparently this channel is going to be needed in the next 1 minute by the next conference. If I can please ask you to just sum up and close for us. Thank you.
Yes, in conclusion, it is important to emphasize that people without the ability to earn a living, especially during this COVID-19, there is a need for this country to look at the possibility of introducing the basic income grant. That is why, as a department currently, we are looking at that particular proposal. It is thus important for all of us, or we should consider it as a duty to respond when the majority of ourselves, which are women in this case, are experiencing a challenge. It is my great pleasure and honor to declare the session closed as we continue to debate these critical issues. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you, Demetria, over to you. Thanks, colleagues.
Okay, I think that mainly we're just closing the session now. We'd like to thank everybody for joining. We will be sending an email follow-up to let everybody have access to the recording of this session, and you'll be able to share that with others that you think would be interested in the session. So closing up now, you will hear from us in the next 2 days, and we'd like to thank you, and please look forward to joining us on further sessions in the future. Thank you.